Today is Thursday, February 16th, 2012, and I am here in the home of Jean Irving, speaking to her about her experiences as a Marine during World War II. Jean is 89 years young, as her birthday is February 3rd, 1923. My name is Elizabeth Lee, and I'll be interviewing Jean on behalf of the Conejo Valley National Society Daughters of the American Revolution for the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress. Ed Lynch from Advanta Videography will be filming the interview. Jean was among the first females of her generation to serve in the Marines from April 14, 1943 to December 15, 1945, and achieved the rank of corporal. She received an American Campaign Medal for her service and a World War II Victory Medal. Okay, Jean, before we begin, let's talk a little bit about your background. Where did you grow up?
All right, I grew up in Norwood, Ohio, which is surrounded by Cincinnati, but it's a little village of its own. I was the youngest of 4 children who were very spaced apart. And my sister, who was 14 when I was born, was the closest one to me. My brother, who was 7 years older than I was, went into the Army, and I worked for Procter & Gamble in Cincinnati when I graduated from high school. In high school, I was very interested in dramatics and drama, and I even wrote a 3-act play which was produced.
Oh my gosh, what was that about?
About kids,
okay.
But what I knew. The first one I wrote was a romantic thing, and my teacher said, "Why don't you write about what you know?" Obviously, I didn't know much about romance. And then I belonged to the Cincinnati Actors Guild, and I think that's probably the reason that I ended up in communications when I was in the Marine Corps.
Okay. Now your brother...
My brother was in the Army, went to Guadalcanal early in the war, and I guess it was a horrendous thing. And it was a letter from him to my family that made me decide that I had to do something besides work for the Red Cross in Ohio. And when the Marines decided finally to admit women, they were the last ones, I was 20, and they were the only ones who would accept a 20-year-old. The rest, you had to be 21. That has since changed.
Okay.
But so I joined the Marines because they would accept me.
Okay. You told me an interesting story on Monday about why the Marines don't have a specific title for women.
Oh, well, yes.
In the military, or in the Marines, rather.
The Marines, we were the last women to be accepted by the military. And everybody had a name, the Wax and the Waves. And the Marine men did not want us. They did not want women in the Marine Corps because, you know, macho, we're tough. And but when they finally said, okay, they said, they'll be Marines. They won't have a nickname. And so we were always the Marine Corps Women's Reserve, and now they've dropped the Women's Reserve because they're all Marines now. And the men were reluctant to accept us, but they were proud of us.
Why do you think they didn't want you in the Marine?
It was the Marines were so macho. You know, they thought they were brainwashed. There was nobody like a Marine, and to this day, once a Marine, always a Marine. There are the only ex-Marines that there are the ones that have brought dishonor to the Marine Corps. All the rest are former Marines. So there's still Marines to the Marine Corps.
But once they accepted and allowed women in, how was it for women in the Marines?
Well, it was so different from civilian life that it was hard to get used to. But when the men did accept us, they treated us like partners, like sisters. They took care of us, and a lot of them married us. But
Yeah.
it was very pleasant. They never. Once they accepted us, that was it.
They didn't make disparaging remarks?
No. They had a nickname for us, but that was a
cute nickname?
a kind name in their mind. But and we didn't mind it because we knew they meant it gently, really.
Yeah. Can you say it on tape?
I don't like to,
Okay.
but I'll say it. They called us BAMs, B-A-M, and that stood for something that they
That they like to comment on.
they liked. But that was the same as like whistling when you walked by, you know, and we got used to that. We knew they meant well.
So if they were so macho, did you feel like you had to be macho, or did you just...
No. Nowadays, the women have to compete with the men. In fact, they're now going to be on the front lines with the men. But in those days, they actually didn't know what to do with us when we were the first ones. The first ones went to Hunter College in New York, and they were not older, but they were in their 20s. And they were looking for officers out of college, teachers out of college, and that sort of thing. I was too young. I wasn't worth anything at that point. And so I was just one of the ground pounders. But the first ones that went to New York became sergeants.
Those are the first ones to enlist.
I enlisted early, but I was young. I was too young.
Okay.
They took the older ones to be the leaders.
Okay.
A 20-year-old, what did they know? You know. So then they taught me what I would know. And after boot camp, which was not rugged at all, I thought it was because I wasn't athletically inclined or anything, but it was very rigid, very organized, and you did everything by the numbers. But when we were finished, we understood what we were and who we were, and it was a great thrill the first time we marched with the Marines behind a band and behind the flags. We were so proud that
With the men, or just as a women's unit?
I beg your pardon?
Did you march with the men?
Well, yes,
Everybody?
at Camp Lejeune, which was where we were trained, they had the men trainees also. And so when we were finishing and we had to troop the colors, it was a big thrill. And we felt like we were Marines. And of course the women weren't rugged. We didn't do the things that they do now. But we did things, we replaced men to go to war. And we did their jobs while they were gone. And we tried to do them the best we could, and we did. We did a very good job. I was sent to radio school. I wanted to be a tower operator, but I was too young. And so I went to radio school, which was very tough. I had to learn Morse code, and I had to be able to transpose Morse code at so many words a minute in order to graduate. I would have graduated anyway, but I might not have had a communications job. But we spent hours and hours typing because the code that we took, we had to type. And it came in 5-letter segments.
Was it dots and dashes?
Yes, yes, and that was tough to learn, although I had a musical background, and it was easier for me than somebody who didn't, because I could hear the music in the dots and dashes. It wasn't music, but I could hear the rhythm. And like some of our teachers, some of these men who had been in Marine communications for years and years could hear words. I could only hear one letter at a time, and it had to get faster and faster that I heard them. But some of these men could hear words like THE. They could hear that. I would have to hear THE.
So they'd hear them, and then when you typed them, did you type them as words with the dots and dashes? Is that what they were doing? Or
No,
did it all
I
string
heard the
together?
dots and dashes, and I typed the letters that I heard.
Oh, okay.
I transposed the dots and dashes. Like SOS is dit dit dit, dot dot dot, dit dit dit. Well,
Okay.
that's what I heard.
Okay.
But I had to write it as SOS.
Okay.
And I didn't know what I was writing most of the time because it was code.
Gotcha.
And so I never knew if I got it right or not, but I guess I did because the messages went out. The communications officer decoded them.
Okay.
And every month the code changed, so he had to redo them each month in a different aspect.
Okay. So they would come in as statements or something like that, and
Well,
but it didn't make any sense.
They
only
would
to
come
somebody who knew
in.
the
They would
code.
be like orders for a squadron to get ready to leave, but it would all be in code, in 5-letter codes, and then the communications officer would transpose them from the code into the message, and then we would deliver the message to the squadron or to whoever it was addressed to. It would come from like Washington or San Diego or from headquarters, and we would be the unit that passed it on.
Where did you go to enlist?
I tried to enlist in Cincinnati. I went to the Marine enlistment office, and he didn't know what to do with me. He said, "Oh, we've never had a woman."
So you're the only woman that ever went in there?
Well, the first one anyway, because the women Marines were established in February, 13th of February, 1943.
Okay.
And I went in about the end of February. And I actually, so they weren't overrun with women
Right. 'Cause
ready
they
to
just
sign
started.
up. They had just started. So he said the only place I know would be to go to Cleveland, to the Marine office in Cleveland. And so I got myself on a train and I went to Cleveland. I had no idea where I was going, but people were very helpful, the cab drivers. And in the train station, somebody got me a hotel room and then told me where the Marine office was. So I did enlist, and but I had to wait until they had a place for me. And I didn't go to New York. I went right. We were the first ones at Cap Lejeune
In North Carolina.
in North Carolina, and there again, the barracks were just being built. They still smelled of new wood, and we had to get out every morning and do calisthenics with the mosquitoes, which were huge. And we had guard duty, and just they were still trying to figure out what to do with us. And then they sent us to the various, when they decided that was a most they could do, they sent us to various schools. And the one I had put in for was Control Tower, but 20 they figured was too young.
How old do you have to be control tower, do you think? Like 25?
Yeah, they wanted more mature people, but I ended up in Santa Barbara almost in the control tower and with a very responsible job, and I was happy with
Why
it.
did you want control tower? What did you like about that?
It just it seemed to be a very romantic thing to do, and very you were with the airplanes and that sort of thing, and it just seemed like a wonderful thing to do.
Had you ever flown before?
No, never been in an airplane. But I did not want to be a secretary, and I specified that on the questionnaire that they gave us, that I did not want to work in an office. I didn't want to be a file clerk. I didn't want to be a secretary. I wanted to work out in the field.
Where there was more action.
To where I felt I could get my hands on actually doing something. I was a secretary, and anybody could be a secretary.
You were a secretary before you joined.
Yes, I worked for
Military.
Procter & Gamble in Cincinnati in the Ivory Tower. But, and so that I ended up in radio school. I wasn't happy at first about that, but it was at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, which was an hour drive from Cincinnati. So I went home every weekend. I really had a cushiony job. And I met a lot of great people, and we really enjoyed the time at Oxford, at Miami University. And then when I graduated, I was sent to Mojave Marine Air Station, and they didn't know what to do with us either. They weren't ready for us. So they didn't have a job for me in radio, so I became what they called a gun air instructor. And it was like Coney Island for me, because I would sit in front, the pilot would be in a cockpit, a mock cockpit behind me, and there was a screen, a movie screen. And
How big? Just as big as a regular movie screen?
Oh, not in a theater,
or just like what you showed pictures on?
But like you would do in your home.
Right, your films
And
and stuff.
they would project a plane flying, and that was me. And I had never flown a plane, but I had a joystick and pedals, and I could bank that plane or do whatever. The pilot behind me was shooting at it, and I was trying to keep him from hitting me, which in a dogfight is what they would do. And he got so many points for every time he hit me. And it was fun. It was, as I said, it was like Coney Island. And they put quite a few of the women in that job.
Did you have one pilot at a time, or were there several?
Oh no! Well, they might be milling around. It was in like a gymnasium almost, and.
But there's only one shooting at you.
But only one in the cockpit.
Okay.
And shooting at the screen, and it was very interesting. I hope they learned how to shoot.
How many dogfights were you in, do you think?
Oh, well, I was only there like a month before I was transferred to Santa Barbara. And then once I went to Santa Barbara, then I really was a radio operator from then on.
Would you ever want to be a pilot?
Oh, I have a pilot's license.
Do you really?
Yes, I took flying lessons. And
When did you do that?
Oh, after I got out of the service, of course. And I went on the GI Bill. First, on the GI Bill, I went to University of Cincinnati. But I was working all day. I'd grab a sandwich, and then I'd run over to University of Cincinnati at night. And I was taking 4 classes, so I had 4 nights that I did that. And I got sick. I was just doing too much. So there I wasn't going to UC anymore, and I said, why don't I take flying lessons? because I could on the GI Bill. And I fully intended to get a commercial license. But I got my pilot's license, and I started with commercial license. And it was a lot of math in it. And I do not do math.
Okay.
So I did not get my commercial license. That was too tough. And my brother was a genius in math. He couldn't understand how I didn't just love math, but I didn't. And I was an artist. I was artistic. I did most of these paintings. And I was not mechanical.
Yeah.
And to be a commercial pilot, you have to do a lot of mechanical things. So, but I still had my pilot's license, and I still.
What'd you do with that?
Well, I took my family for plane rides, and
Cross country?
I beg your pardon?
Cross country?
Oh no, just local.
Okay.
I flew around Ohio. Ohio was very easy to fly around because it's very flat, and the farms are all marked off. You can go from Cincinnati to Columbus just by following the farm lines, and so it was very easy flying, and it was fun, but it was expensive, and I couldn't afford to do much of that.
Was that a Cessna, a little Cessna that you?
Yeah, and my little airplane, and this is my house from the air.
And this was after you got out of
This
the
was
military.
after I got out of the service. Yeah.
But you were influenced probably by what you learned.
Well, I wanted to fly. I did my first flying. My first airplane ride was when I was in Santa Barbara, and we talked our way onto a flight. We had flight privileges if we could get on, and we did. Whenever we got a chance, we'd take a flight, and that was the first flying that I had ever done, but I had decided that I really liked to fly. And
Now, was that a military aircraft or?
in Santa Barbara?
Yeah.
Oh, yes. It was like one of these planes here. These are views from my workplace in Santa Barbara. I had worked in a control room that was nothing but dials and switches and had two little windows. And so I took pictures of all the planes that were parked in front of the control tower. We were one flight. They called it the third deck, and it was on the third floor
Okay.
of the control tower.
Okay.
So we got to see all the planes.
And
all
that's
of
the
them.
view from the.
These are the views from my workplace, and it shows the various planes that were
What type of
used.
planes were those? Do you remember?
Mostly fighter planes. There was a troop carrier, R-4D, and mostly Corsairs, which are the gull-wing aircraft, which the pilots loved to fly. And then there were SNJs and various attack planes. Each squadron had its own aircraft that they flew. Like Pappy Boyington's 214 was stationed at Santa Barbara, and they flew Corsairs. Another squadron flew SNJs, which was an attack plane. They went out after the squadrons of Japanese, and they were quite heroic also. But the Corsair.
How about how many fighter pilots were stationed there?
Oh, I'm sure we had about 5 or 6 squadrons, and each squadron, maybe, I have no
30
idea,
or
but
40 maybe?
40 or to 60 people, and their complement, their mechanics and that sort of thing were there too. And it was quite a large station at Santa Barbara. It's now where the University of Santa Barbara is. UC Santa Barbara
Okay.
was the Marines Air Base. And the civilian controls were at one side of the base, the military controls were on the other side. So they still had civilian planes coming in there, but the control tower controlled both of them, was the military control tower.
Okay. Now, you mentioned Pappy.
Pappy Boyington's.
Okay, now, he was there, stationed there?
I don't think, Pappy wasn't there at the time. This was 214 went on and on after Guadalcanal or wherever they were. And this was another branch of his squadron. They were still the black sheep. The 214 pilots were very close to each other. In fact, I dated one and my roommate dated another one. And they were both on the Franklin when it was bombed by the Japanese. And my friend's boyfriend was killed. And the young man that I dated lost his leg. And but at a later date, they were all together in a reunion in San Francisco, and I opened a Life magazine, and there was his picture. He had fallen down the stairs in the hotel in San Francisco and broken his artificial leg. But that was typical of 214. They were adventurers and they were carousers. And when they partied big. When they flew and fought, they fought big. They were very courageous, and they lost a great many of their pilots. But they were a glamour squadron. I mean, all the pilots wanted to belong to 214. And that's why they made
Glamorous in the way they acted or the way they looked? Or?
Everything. They were.
I'm picturing the scarf.
They were very, very macho and proud of themselves, and they should be. And when they all would sing the "Poor Little Lambs, We Have Lost Our Way," when they'd get together, and they were a glamour squadron, but they earned every bit of it because they really did a job.
Now, you mentioned the Marines accepted women later, and you might have mentioned this too, but why did you pick the Marines as opposed to, say, the Army, where?
I picked the Marines because I was 20, and they were the only ones that would take me.
Oh, okay.
The waves, and I didn't want to be a WAC. I don't know why, but they didn't seem to be as, to me, as glamorous. I'm not glamorous, but the waves had a nice uniform. The Marines, I didn't even know what they had because they weren't even started. But I went to the Marines because it was I wanted to join, and they would take me, and I'm glad I did because I have always been proud to be a Marine, and I always will be.
And you did get a uniform.
Oh yes.
We have photos of you in your
In
uniform.
uniform.
Right here. Isn't this your uniform?
Yes, yes. This is when we first got there to Camp Lejeune. We didn't have uniforms. We had to wear our.
And Camp Lejeune, just for the tape again, was your boot camp.
That's my boot camp.
Yeah.
And we were the first women there in boot camp, and they didn't have any uniforms for us. And it wasn't until we were there several weeks we had to wear our civilian clothes, which were not appropriate for North Carolina. And we suffered a lot from the heat. But then we got a wonderful seersucker uniform with short sleeves, and it was very comfortable, and we enjoyed that. And the green uniform is...
Which is over here, right?
The green uniform is the normal. It's not the dress uniform, but it's the everyday uniform. And men, women, they're all the same color. Now the women have a beautiful dress uniform which they didn't have the whole time we were there. But we also had a white uniform of white shark skin, and then this was the seersucker uniform. And we had our caps, our covers, they weren't called caps, they were called covers, had a green cloth cover that went over it for summertime. And our purses had a matching green cloth cover that went over it. And you had to have all of it together if you wore that uniform. And of course we had white gloves. And all these pictures, I have my white gloves on.
Now, in boot camp, there were also men, but they did not. Your barracks were separate.
We were separate. We were in a little area by ourselves, and we had returning Guadalcanal veterans for drill instructors, and they didn't like us at all.
You being women.
Being women, no. Naturally, they had been through hell on Guadalcanal and lost a lot of their buddies, and they come home and they're drilling women. I mean, they considered that a terrible come down, and they didn't hesitate to let us know that they didn't like that. So when they would drill us, and I think they do it with the men too. You drill for 15 minutes, and then you fall out and immediately fall back in. You don't get a chance to rest or anything. But they let you fall out, but you fell out and you fell back in right away. So they worked us really, really hard.
About how many hours a day did they work you?
Well, we would do an hour at a time of whatever we were doing, and so I don't really know how many hours at a time, but we worked at it a lot, and they had us doing calisthenics a lot, but they didn't know what else to do with us.
Yeah.
And we did have guard duty at night.
Yeah, you told me a funny story about that. Do you want to
Well,
tell that or not?
It's embarrassing, but
Okay,
I'll tell it. Because I was scared to death of these sergeants. I was 20 years old, never been away from home, and here I am trying to follow orders. And on guard duty at night, we had a billy club, and we walked our post from one spot to another with the billy club. And I was afraid that they were testing us when we were doing this. And it was dark. I was walking, and I really have to admit, I was scared to death. And I thought, what'll I do if something happens? But I had this billy club. So I thought I saw somebody coming or standing under the trees, and it's practically a swamp there at Lejeune. And so I'm saying, halt, who goes there? And
Which is what you were supposed to say, what you were
Yeah.
trained to say.
and then no, there was no answer. So I went a few steps farther and I said, halt, who goes there? Nothing. And finally I went a few more steps farther, and I was embarrassed to death to know I've been saying halt to a signpost. And I had to laugh. I thought, oh, you dummy, but I was afraid they were testing me, and if I didn't do what they said I was supposed to do, I would be in trouble. So I did what I thought I was supposed to do.
Did you ever tell anybody on the base that story?
No. Oh, I wouldn't embarrass myself by telling. I can tell it now because it's so long ago.
Yeah.
But I was such a naive little kid, in those days, 20 was very naive, very naive. We didn't know from nothing. Today at 20, I mean, it's just a whole different story.
Now, it would seem that a billy club is not enough for guard duty. Did the Marine men have guns? Or?
Oh, I think they did. I think they must have had pistols or something.
And yet all you had was the billy club.
Yeah. They knew nothing was going to happen. They just wanted us to be practicing. But eventually some of the women did become MPs. You know, that was one of their categories, which they did need. With women in the service, they needed women MPs to take care of them.
So they were exposing you to different kinds of...
Yes. And letting us know that the Marines were brave, I guess. I don't know, but we did we had mess duty, which was totally unpleasant, but we did it, and because everybody did, the men, everybody.
What's mess
did.
duty?
You worked in the kitchen and did dishes, peeled potatoes, whatever they wanted you to do, mopped the floor. And I have some pictures in there of me on mess duty with mops and that sort of thing.
This one?
No, and the other one.
Okay. Did you eat with the men then?
No, we ate in boot camp. We ate by ourselves. The
Yeah,
women
boot camp, yeah.
had their own mess hall, and being on mess duty was just the worst thing that ever you could
See your
imagine.
picture.
But I had to do it as a radio operator. Everybody had to take their turn in mess duty. But this were my roommates, and we had our mops here, and everybody hated it, but you had to do it. It was just one of those things.
Do you keep in contact with anybody from your time at Camp Lejeune?
Not from Camp Lejeune, no. I didn't really know anybody at Camp Lejeune. Everybody was so busy trying to do the right thing that you didn't really have time to make any friends. I made good friends at radio school because there were 4 of us. We were at a university dorm.
In Oxford, that's
At
the next
Oxford,
step.
Ohio,
Yeah.
yes, at Miami University. And they had quite a Navy detachment there. But no, I made quite a few friends in Oxford that went west with me. Some of them went to Mojave, and some of us then went to Santa Barbara. And I still am in touch with one friend that I made in Santa Barbara. She is in South Bend, Indiana, and we exchange Christmas cards. It is about the size of it now, but we're always glad to hear from each other. But she and I were very close friends.
So when you were at Miami of Ohio in radio school, did you just do the typing all day, or did you learn other things as well? And
Well, we had like an hour of typing, an hour of code, and an hour of radio school, learning to take a radio apart, put it together, what the workings of a radio is, which I never really felt at ease with. I don't think I could have taken a radio apart. But as it turns out, I never had to. They just wanted you to know how to do it. But most of our time was hour segments of taking code, and you started out very slowly while you were learning the code, and then you took it home with you and you studied it, and then you worked up faster and faster and faster. And the same but I already knew how to type, and I had already been in high school. I learned to type, and the typing teacher said, typing is like music. You know, type in rhythm. Don't just, and so I learned to type very easily. And in radio school, I worked up to 93 words a minute on a manual typewriter, which is quite a lot.
Extraordinary.
But we did it hours at a time. And how could you not go faster and
Did
faster?
you have to hit a certain words per minute to graduate, or?
No, well, you graduated when your class graduated.
Okay.
Graduation was just merely finishing the course.
Whatever months of training.
Yeah, and in that case, it was from August through the end of the year. August, September, October, November, 5 months. And then I was shipped out
To Mojave.
to Mojave,
And after Mojave, you ended up in
Santa Barbara.
At what point?
Very lucky to be in Santa Barbara.
You had a funny nickname. At what point did you acquire that nickname based on your maiden name?
Oh, Cree? I don't know how I got that. I assume it was from Krieg. See, in the Marine Corps, everybody goes by their last name. You don't know anybody by their first name. I was Krieg. And I suppose somebody, I don't remember, but it was in my diary. That was some of the things in my diary I don't remember, which is amazing. But
We're so lucky you have that diary.
oh yes, yes. And some of the good things that are in it, I'm very pleased to have a recall of, because it was very important to me that I did some good as a Marine. And it was quite an experience. Have never been sorry that I did it.
Of all your responsibilities there on the base at Santa Barbara, what was your favorite thing to do?
Oh, air sea rescue by far, because it was so rewarding. You were actively doing something, like the pilots were actively flying. You were actually doing something.
I don't think we've talked about that yet. Let's talk a little bit about your experiences in air sea rescue.
Okay, well, when I first went up, was told I was going up there, I was in awe, because here is this room with banks of radio receivers and microphones and dials. And it took about a week of one of the men to check me out on all the dials, all the things that I had to do, all the logging that I had to do. I had to listen to all of the aircraft frequencies which were in use at the time. And sometimes there were 2 and 3 squadrons out on different frequencies. And if you heard something out of the ordinary or really an emergency, you had to be actively involved immediately. And many days I sat there listening to everything.
And nothing happened.
And nothing happened. And it got kind of, at first it was very interesting, but it got kind of boring after a while. But then when something did happen, it was almost overwhelming. It was so important. And to know that there were men's lives depending on how quickly you acted and what you did was awesome after it was over. At the time, you did what you had to do as fast as you could. And that was to notify the squadron commanders and the operations officer and the control tower that there was an emergency. And you had to alert the Coast Guard boats. Coast Guard had 2 boats in Santa Barbara Harbor. You had to get them to start their engines until they knew that they had to wait for orders. And the flying boat, the air sea rescue boat, airplane, we called it a boat, but it was, you had to alert the Coast Guard people, and they would run out, start their engines, and wait for you to give them further instructions. But the commanders from the squadrons would immediately come to the third deck and take over. I didn't have...
For their pilots. Is that right? No.
The commanders, excuse me, were, of course they were pilots too, but they would come to give instructions to
Okay.
hopefully to the guy that was in trouble or to the other planes that were with them. They would get their location and what had happened and what was going on. And one of the things I had to do was to get their location from the other pilots who were flying with them.
Okay.
And I could not give them any orders unless somebody told me to give them orders. But I had to get their location and then transmit it to the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard went after them. Nobody else was allowed the rest of the people who were flying had to move off, and if they went into the water, we had to know where they were and go get them. And at this one particular time, it was 35 minutes from the time that I first heard was one of our planes is going down to the time that the Coast Guard radioed, we have all 5 men. And the Coast Guard headquarters in San Diego called and said, "Job well done." And that, that made us feel really good. But they didn't always get them. Sometimes if they went in the water, they went down and they weren't recovered. But they all had life jackets and there were life rafts, and the pilots knew what to do. And if they did it right and they weren't hurt when they went in, we were able to get them. And it was a wonderful feeling.
Were you trained to ask certain questions or ask things in a certain way, or when you heard trouble?
Well, yes, we had to find out where they were. We had to get their location, and did they go in or not? Or sometimes we almost never talked to the pilot who was in trouble. It was usually, and they were never out there alone. Well, they might be out there alone, but they weren't usually in trouble. But if they were out there with a squadron doing maneuvers, we were on the radio with somebody from their squadron, and then we had to notify everybody on the base who was concerned immediately. I mean, you couldn't stop and say, "What'll I do now?" You had to just do it. Just do it.
What kind of trouble did they have, Jennifer?
Well, they had engine trouble usually, because when they were dogfighting, they were over the land usually, and we had them go in from dogfighting over the land, but we had nothing to do with that because we were in air-sea rescue. We worked with the Coast Guard,
right,
and the water rescues. But it was quite an experience, especially for a 20-year, well, by that time I was 21, but somebody from Ohio who had never ever been in an airplane.
How long did you do the air sea rescue? How many years? A couple years?
I think I was in there about a year and a half. I had to stay until a Marine replaced me, a male Marine replaced me. And of course later they closed Santa Barbara, the Marine base, down. And as I said, it's now the University of UC Santa Barbara. But the war was over in, I think, September, something like that. I can't remember exactly. And I didn't get out until December, until somebody came to take my place. So that was interesting.
Where did you go after the war?
Well, I was sent down to El Toro to be discharged. So I was discharged from El Toro, and then I took a bus back to Santa Barbara and went to work in the operations office at their request. I didn't do air sea rescue then. I just did secretarial work. But I was still involved.
Yeah.
But my family just kept after me to come back to Ohio, and so I reluctantly did. But I didn't stay.
Yeah.
I had had enough of snow and ice and that sort of thing.
Well, one of the questions I usually ask in closing is, what kind of impact do you think being in the military had on you, or how did it change you?
Well, it had a great impact on me in that I grew up. I learned that I could take responsibility, and I could do things that I never dreamed that I would be able to do. I learned a lot, and it influenced my life forever. The Marine Corps itself, and being in the military, and learning responsibilities that when I left home, I never dreamed that I could have done. And as I said, I grew up.
Well, on behalf of our country and the Conejo Valley DAR, we would like to thank you for your service.
Well, it was my pleasure, and it's a great thing that you're doing to keep this going, and I'm glad to be a part of it.